The hive city of Noctis Prime burned under a sky blackened by smoke and ash. Its spires clawed at the clouds like the jagged fingers of a dead god. Lightning arced across the horizon, illuminating broken banners of the Imperium, shredded and fluttering in the toxic wind. The streets below were a labyrinth of shadows, twisted scaffolds, and debris-strewn avenues, where the echoes of the terrified citizens blended with the distant roar of artillery. From the heights of a crumbling cathedral, a dark figure watched silently, cape fluttering like a shadow made of smoke, eyes scanning the chaos with mechanical precision. Batman had arrived in a world that did not understand mercy, a place where even heroes were suspects, and every step was measured against the cold, unforgiving judgment of the Imperium. The sound of bolter fire erupted from the central plaza as chaos cultists tore through the Imperial Arbites, their grotesque faces lit with fanatic devotion and warped mutation. Civilians screamed as the first wave of destruction crashed through the market streets, and the air thickened with the acrid stench of burning flesh and ceramite. Batman descended into the fray, landing with the silent inevitability of a predator, his armored gauntlets cracking skulls, his grapnel gun snapping taut lines that flung enemies into the jagged ruins. Every movement was precise, calculated, almost surgical, a dance of death conducted amid the carnage. The cultists faltered, their chaos energy flickering against his advanced war gear, but they did not flee. They roared in defiance, certain that their god would shield them from this intruder. Above him, the ruins of a cathedral trembled as a demon's roar split the air, and the ground beneath the plaza pulsed with unnatural energy. Sparks leapt across shattered streets as Batman's armored boots struck ceramite and stone, his cloak sweeping in a whirlwind that obscured his silhouette. He moved like a shadow through fire, breaking ranks of enemies with precise brutality, yet never losing focus on the innocents cowering behind shattered walls. Each step brought him closer to the heart of the chaos ritual, the source of the corruption that threatened to engulf the entire sector. The cultist chants rose to a fevered pitch, and with each word, the city seemed to quake, the line between reality and warp-tainted nightmare blurring under the weight of imminent catastrophe. The final strike came suddenly. With a surge of calculated force, Batman tore through the demon's corporeal manifestation, shattering bone, armor, and spirit alike, and the streets fell momentarily silent except for the hiss of burning rubble. Civilians stared wide-eyed, some in awe, some in terror, as the figure who did not belong to their world stood amid the ruin, blood and ceramite spattered across his armor. Yet victory was fleeting. From the shadows, eyes gleamed behind visors and goggles. Inquisitors, Arbites, and Imperial enforcers marked him as rogue, a threat to their law as much as the chaos he had just vanquished. In that moment, Batman realized that in the Imperium, saving lives was not a triumph. It was a crime, and the hunter would soon become the hunted. The city trembled around him, fires flickering like dying hearts, and the stage was set for a conflict that would test every ounce of his will, cunning and unyielding code. The city of Noctis Prime had settled into a tense, uneasy quiet after the chaos erupted in the plaza, but the silence was deceptive. Fire still burned in jagged heaps of rubble, casting long, flickering shadows across streets torn by artillery and collapsed scaffolding. The air was thick with smoke, the stench of burning ceramite, and the faint metallic tang of blood hanging like a permanent cloud. Civilians, their faces pale and haunted, scurried through back alleys and ruined corridors, whispering prayers to gods they barely understood, uncertain whether salvation or death awaited them. Batman moved among them like a shadow, his silhouette blending into the darkness, grappling from one crumbling tower to another, eyes scanning for threats that no ordinary human could see. Every building he passed was a potential trap. Every echo of distant machinery or moaning survivor could hide cultists rogue psychers, or Imperial patrols determined to enforce the law without hesitation. His mind raced, cataloging every possible scenario, calculating trajectories, and planning attacks before any combat had even begun. A predator in a hive city built to devour those who strayed from its order. The first encounter came suddenly, as it always did in this war-torn world. From a side alley emerged a small squad of Arbites, their ceramite armor dented and scorched, bolters raised and voices barking commands in the guttural cadence of the Imperium. They did not recognize him, or perhaps they did, and their loyalty to the law demanded they eliminate a rogue vigilante who had become a symbol of defiance. Batman did not hesitate. His gauntlet-fired grapnel shot a line that wrapped around the nearest Arbite's legs, yanking him forward with a bone-jarring force. In the same fluid motion, he swept another off his feet with a reinforced shoulder strike, the sound of ceramite cracking echoing through the alley like gunfire. The remaining enforcers opened fire, their bolters spitting explosive rounds that tore chunks of masonry and flesh alike. But Batman was already gone, melting into the shadows, his movement almost inhuman in its precision. Every encounter was a dance of death, a brutal calculation of offense and evasion, demonstrating not only his unmatched combat skill, but also the stark reality that in Imperium, even heroes could be hunted as criminals. As he pressed deeper into the hive city, the environment itself became a weapon. Narrow walkways twisted above bottomless chasms of industrial machinery. Cables snapped and sparked underfoot, and the scent of ozone and burning insulation filled his respirator. Cultist activity increased with every step, and their desperate attempts to summon warp energy reverberated through the streets, causing subtle distortions in reality that made each movement dangerous. Batman navigated the maze with a combination of brutal efficiency and surgical stealth, disabling traps and ambushes before they could strike. He discovered a small enclave of terrified civilians hiding in the ruins of a collapsed manufactorum, their wide eyes filled with a mixture of awe and fear of the armored figure who had become both their savior and a potential target of the Imperium. For a moment, he allowed himself to consider them, his mind flickering with the human need to protect, but the urgency of the mission propelled him forward. Every second counted. The cultists were attempting to complete a ritual that could summon horrors beyond comprehension, and time was slipping through his fingers like ash. The deeper he ventured, the more the corruption revealed itself. Patches of ground were scorched with unnatural energy, walls pulsed as if alive, and the faint, distorted wail of the warp resonated through the corridors. One particularly narrow passage led to a stairwell where the walls were carved with symbols that twisted the mind of any human observer, and Batman had to pause, recalibrating his mental focus to resist the subtle psychic assault. From the shadows, mutated cultists lunged, claws glinting in the faint light, eyes ablaze with zealotry. He struck without hesitation, bones shattering under reinforced gauntlets, blades severed with precision strikes, and yet every kill seemed to echo further into the city, warning others of predator among them. It was not enough to survive. He had to ensure the ritual failed. Even as the city itself seemed to conspire against him, every corridor a potential death trap, every shadow hiding foes, or worse, something that was neither human nor entirely of the material world. At the center of the hive, the ritual site revealed the true scale of the threat. A massive, desecrated cathedral had been repurposed into a chaotic altar, adorned with glowing warp sigils that pulsed with malevolent energy. Cultists formed a protective circle around a towering figure shrouded in dark energy. The demon spawned at the heart of the ritual, preparing to breach the veil between realities. Batman assessed the battlefield in an instant, his mind mapping every angle of attack, every weakness, every opportunity to strike without endangering the innocents who had been corralled into the outer sanctum. Bolters cracked, Chain's words roared, and the very air seemed to tremble with anticipation. With a calculated surge, he launched himself into the fray, a blur of armor movement, disrupting cultist formations, severing limbs, and shattering their morale with a precision that bordered on terrifying. Every attack was deliberate, designed not just to kill, but to manipulate the battlefield, forcing enemies into vulnerable positions while protecting civilians from collateral damage. Despite his tactical brilliance, the Imperium's presence could not be ignored. From the upper galleries, Inquisitors and Arbites watched, their visors reflecting the chaos below. Their decision was clear. They would act against him once the immediate threat was contained, and their judgment would be final. Batman's awareness of their gaze only sharpened his focus. Each movement timed and calculated to minimize exposure while maximizing effect. Every swing of a blade, every grapnel shot, was performed with the knowledge that he was not merely fighting cultists, but also the inevitable pursuit of the Imperium itself. Fear, adrenaline, and determination intertwined as he pushed forward, reaching the inner sanctum where the ritual's energy warped reality into jagged fragments, the temperature rising, shadows twisting unnaturally, and a faint whisper of chaos seeping into his mind. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, a crushing reminder that in this universe, morality was a fragile luxury, and the cost of failure was measured in lives, corruption, and irredeemable damnation. At the climax of the engagement, Batman struck the demon spawn directly, channeling all his physical strength, tactical ingenuity, and grim determination into a single, decisive maneuver. The force of the strike shattered the corrupted vessel, sending shockwaves through the cathedral, collapsing walls, and scattering the remaining cultists in terrified disarray. Civilians screamed and fled, some injured, some frozen in awe, as the energy dissipated with an eerie hiss, leaving an unnatural silence in its wake. Batman stood amidst the wreckage, armor scorched and battered, breathing through the respirator, surveying the aftermath. Victory was hollow. From the shadows, the unblinking eyes of the Imperium marked him, their judgment silent but inevitable. He had saved lives, but in doing so, he had placed himself directly in the crosshairs of an empire that did not forgive, an empire where law and order were iron, and those who defied it were marked for death. Even as he moved to disappear into the endless corridors of the hive, the city seemed to close around him, a living, breathing labyrinth of danger, corruption, and unseen enemies, the first chapter of a war that had only just begun. The deeper Batman ventured into the underbelly of Noctis Prime, the more the corruption of the hive city revealed itself. The streets narrowed into claustrophobic alleys where twisted scaffolds formed jagged canyons of metal and concrete, and the air vibrated with a low hum of unnatural energy. Shadows seemed alive, slithering along walls like black smoke, and every distant echo could conceal a trap or a scream. Civilians huddled in corners, their faces hollowed by fear, whispering prayers to gods they could barely remember, while the faint glow of warp-tainted light flickered through shattered windows above. Batman moved among them like a specter, his armored boots silent against the ruined cobblestones, his cape blending with the darkness. Every detail of the environment was catalogued in his mind, from precarious piles of rubble to the flickering electrical conduit above, as he navigated a battlefield where every alley could become a death trap, and every shadow might hide an enemy or worse, something that had once been human, but now belonged to chaos. The first signs of the cult's resurgence appeared in the form of graffiti etched with warped symbols across walls, glowing faintly with a sickly luminescence. Small cells of cultists skulked through the streets, muttering prayers to unknown entities, their forms distorted by mutation and dark sorcery. They were scavengers of death and disease, striking at any movement, any sign of life, and retreating as if the city itself guided them. Batman engaged them with surgical precision, striking from the shadows with reinforced gauntlets and grapnel shots, using the environment to his advantage. Each confrontation was a brutal dance of offense and evasion, limbs shattered, bolters smashed, and yet he moved like a shadow that could not be contained. Civilians watched with wide, fearful eyes as their savior became a storm of violence, a force that could turn the tide of war yet existed outside the Imperium's sanctioned justice. Every kill, every strike, carried a heavy moral weight, for Batman's code demanded protection above all, even as the city seemed intent on punishing him for interfering. As he pressed further into the hive, the signs of warp corruption became undeniable. Walls pulsed faintly, as though breathing, and the air shimmered with unnatural heat and static. Distorted echoes of distant screams and whispers filled his ears, bending reality in subtle, disorienting ways. He paused at an intersection where the ground had buckled into jagged fissures, remnants of a demon incursion, and assessed the danger. From the shadows, mutated cultists lunged with claws and teeth, their bodies twitching unnaturally, veins glowing with corrupted energy. Batman reacted instantly, grappling to a higher ledge and raining down precise strikes, snapping limbs and shattering skulls, moving faster than any human could comprehend. The battlefield became a deadly chessboard, and every motion required calculating not only his immediate survival, but the potential consequences of exposing innocents to the lingering warp energy that seeped into the city. He was a predator in the city of predators, hunted and hunter all at once. The ritual sight was drawing him inexorably forward, a magnetic pull of corruption, an evil that resonated through the hive. As he approached, the faint screams of the victims being used as sacrifices reached his ears, and his focus sharpened to a deadly clarity. The cultists had begun their preparations for a larger incursion, attempting to summon creatures that belonged neither to this world nor any conceivable reality. Their energy radiated in waves, twisting the nearby architecture, causing metal to warp and stone to crack under invisible pressure. Batman's mind worked rapidly, identifying structural weaknesses, angles of approach, and escape routes. He moved with deliberate silence, disabling traps, neutralizing lone guards, and leaving chaos in his wake. Civilians glimpsed him in the corridors, a dark angel of vengeance whose presence offered both hope and terror, and for a fleeting moment, the weight of the Imperium's judgment pressed against him, a silent threat that could descend at any second. As the rituals grew in intensity, Batman's senses were assaulted by psychic distortions. The air thickened with energy, his vision blurred with flashes of impossible geometry, and whispers clawed at his mind, promising power, knowledge, or death. The cultists, sensing his proximity, became frenzied, their attacks more erratic and desperate, yet still coordinated enough to pose a deadly threat. He engaged them with relentless efficiency, his combat style a perfect blend of martial skill, advanced technology, and psychological manipulation. Grapnels snapped taut, limbs flew, and reinforced gauntlets shattered bone and armor alike. In the chaos, one civilian screamed as a warp-tainted creature lunged toward them, and Batman's reflexes intercepted the threat, the strike precise and merciless. Every action was a calculated moral choice. Protect the innocent, disrupt the ritual, survive. Failure in any of these domains would result in catastrophe. The deeper chambers of the hive revealed the cult's most horrific acts. Prisoners, drained of blood and life energy, lay strung across jagged frames, their bodies twisted unnaturally. The walls pulsed with glowing runes, casting an eerie green light that reflected off Batman's armor and highlighted the intensity of the corruption. The closer he got to the central ritual, the more chaotic reality became. Gravity seemed inconsistent. Shadows moved independently, and the faint whispers of the warp grew louder, coiling around his mind like smoke. He moved with an unyielding focus, every movement precise, every strike calculated, neutralizing threats before they could manifest fully. Even as the physical danger mounted, the psychological pressure was relentless, testing his will, his moral code, and his capacity to remain human in a world designed to break anyone who opposed it. At the heart of the corrupted hive, the cultists had formed a protective ring around a massive warp conduit, the energy pulsating violently as if alive. The demon at the center had begun to manifest partially in the material world, a writhing, grotesque figure with limbs that bent impossibly and eyes that burned with intelligence and malice. Batman assessed the battlefield instantly, identifying a sequence of strikes and maneuvers necessary to disrupt the ritual without annihilating the prisoners trapped in the outer ring. He moved with lethal grace, grappling across platforms, striking from angles that no one anticipated, and dismantling the cultist defenses with precision strikes and controlled explosions. Each action was a combination of brute force and tactical genius. His presence a counterbalance to the chaos attempting to consume the sector. The tension was unbearable. One misstep could allow the demon to break through fully, spreading destruction and corruption across the hive and beyond. The climax of Chapter 2 arrived in a whirlwind of violence and psychic energy. Batman engaged the demon spawn directly. His attacks focused on destabilizing the conduit that fed its partial manifestation, while avoiding the prisoners and civilians trapped in the surrounding area. Bolts of warp energy struck the walls, explosions ripped through the floors, and screams echoed from every level of the hive. Batman's armored form moved faster than the eye could follow, striking limbs, redirecting energy, and using grapnels to reposition across unstable terrain. The battle was as much about strategy and precision as it was brute strength, a deadly ballet of shadows, violence, and grim determination. When the final strike shattered the conduit, the demon screamed, its form dissipating in a burst of warp energy that threw debris and cultists across the inner sanctum. The ritual was halted, the immediate threat neutralized, but the cost was evident in the ruined environment and the lingering psychic echoes that would haunt the hive for days. As the dust settled, Batman paused to survey the aftermath. Civilians, some injured, some trembling in awe, began to emerge from hiding, their eyes reflecting both relief and fear. The silence of the hive city was fragile, broken only by the crackling of burning debris and the distant hum of machinery. From the shadows above, the unblinking gaze of the Imperium marked him, visors reflecting the ruin below, inquisitors and arbites assessing every detail. Batman knew that his actions, though saving countless lives, had placed him squarely in their crosshairs. The hunt had only begun. With grim determination, he melted back into the corridors of the hive, shadows swallowing his form as the city itself seemed to pulse with latent corruption. The mission was partially complete, the cult disrupted, but the war was far from over. Chaos remained. The Imperium's wrath was inevitable, and in this universe, victory was always temporary, and forgiveness was a luxury that did not exist. The silence that followed the disrupted ritual was fragile, a temporary calm that hung over the hive like a death shroud. Batman moved through the upper tiers of Noctis Prime, his armored form slipping across catwalks and twisted scaffolds as he scanned for any residual cult activity. Smoke and the faint glow of warp-tainted energy painted the city in a sickly green hue, casting long, shifting shadows at dangers as old as the Imperium itself. Every movement was deliberate, every step measured, for he knew that the Imperium had been watching, and now they would strike. From the high galleries, bolters cracked, their explosive rounds tearing chunks of masonry and metal as the Adeptus Arbites deployed, their disciplined formations cutting off escape routes. Batman observed their approach with cold calculation, noting patterns, assessing firepower, and preparing to engage an enemy who would not hesitate to execute him for his rogue actions. The city had become a living battlefield, and he was caught between two unstoppable forces, the remnants of chaos and the unyielding machinery of the Imperium. The first engagement was sudden and violent. Arbites descended into the ruined plaza below, their ceramite armor glinting under the flickering light of fires and warp energy, bolters trained on him with unwavering precision. Batman reacted instantly, firing grapnels to swing across ruined towers and dropping behind cover, his cape flowing like liquid shadow. Explosions erupted where he had been seconds before, displacing rubble and sending shards of ceramite skittering across the streets. Every move he made was designed to disorient, to manipulate, to strike with maximum effect while minimizing collateral damage to civilians still trapped in the area. The Arbites advanced with methodical efficiency, using disciplined formations and suppressive fire, but Batman's tactics were unpredictable. He struck from above, flung enemies into one another with reinforced gauntlets, and deployed EMP grenades to disrupt targeting systems, turning the city itself into an ally against his pursuers. Each encounter reinforced the bitter reality that in the Imperium, even heroes were expendable, and survival depended on cunning, speed, and a willingness to embrace the darkness within. As the battle intensified, the environment became both a weapon and a threat. Sections of the hive had collapsed during the ritual's disruption, forming precarious ledges and chasms that could swallow the unwary. Sparks leapt from severed cables, and fire spread unpredictably, forcing Batman to constantly adapt. From the shadows, pockets of cultists who had survived the earlier purge struck with renewed ferocity, bolstered by minor warp manifestations that gave them unnatural strength and resilience. Batman moved through this chaos with precision, his combat style blending martial skill, advanced technology, and the psychological manipulation that had always set him apart. Each strike had to account not only for the immediate threat, but also for potential consequences of drawing too much attention. For the Imperium's gaze was relentless, and one misstep could turn tactical brilliance into a death sentence. His actions were brutal yet measured, a perfect balance of violence and strategy that left enemies disoriented, fearful, and often broken before he moved on. Amid the chaos, Batman caught glimpses of the Imperium's more formidable assets. A squad of heavily armored space marines appeared on the horizon, their bolters spitting death, their ceramite shining under the flickering light of the ruined hive. Their objective was clear: eliminate the rogue operative who had disrupted a sanctioned Imperial purge. Batman recalculated instantly, recognizing that direct engagement would be suicidal, and instead opted to manipulate the battlefield, using debris, shadows, and elevated positions to neutralize the immediate threat while buying time. Grapnels fired. Cables snapped into support beams, and entire sections of ruins were brought down to create barriers and redirect the heavily armed forces. He was a force of controlled chaos, turning the environment into a weapon, and even the most disciplined space marines were forced to adapt to a foe who anticipated their every move with almost inhuman foresight. The hive itself seemed to respond to his presence, corridors opening into unexpected paths, shadows deepening where he needed concealment, and the faint hum of warp energy twisting the landscape into a deadly labyrinth. The culmination of the conflict came in the central industrial sector of the hive, where the remnants of cult activity had gathered. Here, the fusion of chaos and Imperial enforcement created a battlefield unlike any other, with civilians trapped amid shifting lines of fire and energy. Batman descended from the upper galleries, landing amidst the chaos with a calculated force that shattered the ground beneath him. He moved like a living weapon, striking cultists, disrupting warp energy nodes, and using grapnels to swing across precarious walkways to neutralize threats before they could act. The Space Marines pressed forward with brutal efficiency, bolters roaring, chains words carving through debris and enemy alike. Batman engaged them strategically, exploiting terrain and timing to redirect fire, using his gadgets to create temporary barriers, and striking at key targets to destabilize formations. Every action was a high-stakes calculation, balancing survival, mission success, and the protection of innocents trapped in the inferno. As the battle raged, Batman's awareness of the Imperium's observation grew. From the shadows, Inquisitors watched with cold, unblinking eyes, recording every maneuver, every strike, and every instance of defiance. They would judge him not only for his actions, but for the intent behind them, and the consequences of failure were absolute. He moved with precision, neutralizing threats while leaving no room for error, and in the midst of this chaos, he remained acutely aware that time was finite, that the ritual remnants still pulsed with latent warp energy, and that the city itself was teetering on the edge of collapse. Civilians cowered, debris rained from above, and the combined fury of chaos and the Imperium threatened to overwhelm even his unmatched skill. Every step, every strike, was a defiance of the rigid order imposed by an empire that did not forgive, a statement of survival in a universe defined by brutality. The climax of the chapter was both brutal and calculated. Batman identified the central warp conduit that had survived the earlier disruption and focused his efforts on destabilizing it while keeping the Imperium at bay. Explosions rocked the sector. Bolters cracked, and cultists and Space Marines alike were thrown into disarray. Batman moved like a force of nature, striking limbs, neutralizing power nodes, and redirecting enemy forces into positions of disadvantage. Every maneuver was a careful balance of offense and defense, designed to ensure the survival of innocents and the continuation of his mission. The conduit erupted in a controlled collapse, the resulting shockwave throwing enemies across the ruined streets and severing the cultists' hold on the remaining warp energy. Civilians screamed as debris fell, yet many survived thanks to his intervention, their awe and fear mixing into a fragile hope. When the dust settled, the battlefield was a tableau of ruin and survival. Fires still burned, machinery smoldered, and a lingering hum of warp energy created an almost tangible tension in the air. Batman stood amidst the wreckage, armor scorched, cape torn, and respirator hissing with filtered smoke, surveying the aftermath with grim satisfaction. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the Imperium's scrutiny was absolute. From the shadows, bolters and visors reflected the ruin below, Inquisitors and Space Marines marking him for elimination. The city, still alive with corruption and latent warp energy, loomed around him, a reminder that the battle was far from over. Batman melted into the shadows once more, a silent predator in a hive that would never forgive, carrying with him the knowledge that the war for Noctis Prime had only escalated, and that both Chaos and the Imperium would pursue him with relentless fury. The deeper Batman ventured into the hive's industrial core, the air grew thicker, charged with malignant energy that gnawed at the edges of perception. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the jagged walls of collapsed manufactorums, and a faint glow of warp-tainted light illuminated grotesque symbols etched into every surface. The faint hum of machinery was distorted by the pulse of chaotic energy, each vibration resonating through the metal and concrete, as if the city itself were alive and malevolent. Civilians, long since abandoned by hope, whispered from the ruins, faces pale and eyes wide, as if their very gaze might invite annihilation. Batman moved silently, a shadow among shadows, stepping over shattered beams and twisted conduits, his cape blending with the darkness. Every step was deliberate, every movement calculated, for he knew that the deeper he went, the more the fabric of reality itself was being bent by the cultist's warp rituals. The stench of burnt ceramite, ozone, and something more intangible, rock corruption and despair, filled his respirator, anchoring him in the grim reality that in this universe, survival demanded not just strength but unyielding focus. The first signs of true warp corruption came swiftly. A corridor that should have been a straight path twisted impossibly, the walls pulsing with an unholy rhythm that seemed to breathe. From these twisting shadows emerged cultists more grotesque than any had faced before, their forms warped by mutation and dark sorcery, limbs bent unnaturally, skin stretched taut over jagged bone, eyes burning with fanatical intelligence. They moved with erratic speed, attacking with claws and blades that seemed to ripple with energy. Batman struck with lethal precision, his gauntlet shattering bones, his grapnel shots sending enemies flying into broken machinery. Yet he did not linger. Every strike had to be measured. The slightest hesitation or miscalculation could leave civilians exposed or trigger a reaction from the warp itself. He advanced to the corridor, moving with inhuman agility, his tactical mind processing every threat, every angle, and every variable in an environment that defied conventional logic. Each movement was a test of endurance, a balance between violence and restraint, and the pressure of impending confrontation weighed like iron on his shoulders. The central chamber loomed ahead, massive and distorted, a cathedral of corruption built from steel and bone. Warp energy crackled through the air, twisting reality so that beams and floors seemed to bend under invisible pressure. Cultists formed a protective circle around a massive warp conduit, a living entity of energy that pulsed with every heartbeat of the hive. At the center, a demon of incomprehensible size and malevolence had begun to manifest, its form flickering between the physical and the immaterial, eyes burning with an intelligence that chilled the soul. Batman surveyed the battlefield instantly, calculating every trajectory, every possible sequence of attacks, and every risk to the innocent who had been forced into the chamber as sacrifices. He launched into action, moving like a specter through the chaos, his strikes precise, targeting limbs and key structures to destabilize the ritual while keeping collateral damage to a minimum. The energy in the room warped sound, vision, and balance, yet Batman adapted, exploiting every anomaly, turning the environment into a weapon against the cultists and the demon alike. Civilians cowered at the edges of the chamber, their faces reflecting both terror and awe. One misstep could send them into the path of a warp-infused strike or collapsing debris. Batman moved with brutal efficiency, grapnel snapping taut, reinforced gauntlets smashing bone and armor, and strategically detonated EMP charges to disrupt minor warp nodes. The demon roared, a sound that reverberated through the chamber, twisting the air and sending waves of disorientation toward anyone in range. Batman advanced, countering not only the physical threat, but the psychic assault as well, his training, determination, and advanced technology allowing him to resist the insidious pull of chaos. Every movement was a delicate balance between aggression and restraint, a lethal ballet of survival and protection, as the hive itself seemed to conspire against him. The very ground shifted beneath his boots, and shadows writhed like serpents. Yet he pressed forward, driven by a relentless need to end the threat before it could manifest fully into reality. The cultists, sensing the weakening of their ritual, became more frenzied, their attacks reckless but deadly. Warp energy flared in wild arcs, lighting the chamber in sickly green and violet hues, and the demon's form stabilized enough to strike directly, limbs stretching impossibly to swipe at the intruder. Batman met each attack with calculated countermeasures, grappling to elevated positions, redirecting momentum, and striking with surgical brutality. Each engagement was a deadly puzzle, requiring split-second decisions and flawless execution. Civilians screamed as debris fell from the warped ceiling, yet Batman's movement shielded them whenever possible, his presence a blend of terror and salvation. Every strike carried weight. Every motion had consequence, and the chamber itself seemed to pulse in response to his resolve, as if recognizing the determination of a mortal standing against the incomprehensible forces of chaos. At the climax of the confrontation, Batman identified the key point in the warp conduit, the nexus where the energy was most concentrated, and where destabilization would prevent the demon from fully manifesting. He deployed a series of precision strikes and carefully placed charges, each movement choreographed to exacting standards, even as cultists attempted to intervene and the demon's attacks threatened to overwhelm him. Sparks flew, metal twisted, and energy arcs lanced through the chamber. Yet Batman remained focused, moving faster than the eye could follow, his armor gleaming with a reflection of destructive light and shadows alike. The final charge detonated with controlled force, sending a shockwave through the chamber that disintegrated the conduit's core, scattering cultists and destabilizing the demon's partial form. The energy dissipated in a violent hiss, leaving the room scarred and silent, the remaining cultists either dead or fleeing into the labyrinthine ruins. Silence followed the collapse, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the faint moans of the injured and the distant hum of machinery strained by residual warp energy. Batman stood amid the wreckage, armor scorched and dented, respirator hissing as he surveyed the aftermath. Civilians began to emerge from hiding, shaken and trembling, their faces reflecting a mixture of relief and fear. Yet there was no satisfaction in victory. From the shadows above, the unblinking gaze of the Imperium had returned. Inquisitors and Arbites had assessed the destruction, noting every violation, every breach of Imperial law, and every act of defiance. Batman knew that the Imperium would not forgive, that they would pursue him with relentless determination, and that the true cost of his actions was yet to be paid. Even in saving the lives of innocents, he had marked himself as a target, a rogue element in a universe that demanded absolute obedience. As he prepared to depart, the lingering presence of the warp reminded him that the threat was not fully contained. Residual energy pulsed through the ruined chamber, flickering with whispers of what might have been, teasing with visions of unimaginable horrors. Batman moved carefully through the corridors, grapnels snapping, shadows swallowing him as he melted into the depths of the hive. The mission had succeeded in halting the immediate incursion, yet the moral and strategic consequences were far from resolved. Chaos remained, simmering beneath the surface, and Imperium's wrath was inevitable. The city, scarred and haunted, reflected the eternal struggle between order and anarchy, mortality and divinity, and the fragile existence of those who dared to defy both forces. In the grim silence that followed, Batman vanished into the darkness, a lone guardian in a universe where salvation was temporary and no victory came without a cost. The aftermath of the warp conduit's collapse left the hive city of Noctis Prime trembling, as if it had exhaled its last breath. Fires burned in irregular patterns across shattered streets, the acrid stench of smoke and scorched ceramite clinging to the air like a heavy fog. Civilians emerged cautiously from hiding, their eyes wide with disbelief, as though the dark figure who protected them might vanish before they could express gratitude. Batman moved among them silently, his armor dented and scorched, respirator hissing with filtered smoke, Kate brushing the ground like a shadow made of liquid night. Every step carried the weight of responsibility. Every decision had consequences in a universe where salvation was rare and mercy rarer still. He assessed the structural integrity of the ruins, the latent warp energy that still pulsed faintly in the walls, and the scattered remains of cultists who had either fled or perished. The immediate danger was contained, yet the knowledge of the Imperium's relentless pursuit pressed upon him, a constant reminder that in this universe, victory was only temporary, and forgiveness did not exist. The Imperium's forces appeared without warning, descending like an iron tide from the high galleries above. Space Marines, their ceramite armor gleaming under the dim light of fires and warp distortions, moved with terrifying precision, bolters at the ready, their every motion radiating lethal intent. Arbites and Inquisitors flanked them, scanners sweeping the area, their visors reflecting the ruined city below. Batman's eyes narrowed as he calculated every possible course of action, every angle of attack, and every escape route. He could not outgun the Imperium head-on, nor could he afford to be captured alive. Instead, he became the shadow of a predator, using the ruins themselves as weapons, collapsing walls to block paths, creating choke points, and manipulating debris to redirect the advancing forces. Every maneuver was a gamble, balancing survival, mission success, and the protection of civilians who remained in the crumbling hive. He was alone against the overwhelming machinery of the Imperium. Yet his tactical mind, honed over years of battling the impossible, gave him an edge that few could predict. Chaos remnants, sensing the weakness created by the conduit's destruction, surged unexpectedly. Warp-tainted cultists and minor demons emerged from fissures in the city, attacking indiscriminately, seeking to exploit the distraction. Batman responded with precision, a whirlwind of calculated strikes, grapnel swings, and reinforced gauntlet blows. Each move dismantled threats while ensuring civilians were kept from harm. Sparks erupted as the strikes connected. Twisted metal and debris flew, and energy blasts ricocheted off walls. Civilians screamed, bolters thundered, and the clash of ideologies manifested physically in the streets of Noctis Prime. Batman's combat was more than a fight. It was a statement of resistance against overwhelming force, a calculated defiance of both chaos and the Imperium, demonstrating that morality, strategy, and determination could still hold sway in a universe defined by brutality and death. The pivotal moment came when a demon, larger and more stable than any previously encountered, emerged from the core of the remaining warp energy. Its form flickered between the material and immaterial, limbs stretching impossibly, eyes burning with cunning intelligence. The creature's arrival split the battlefield, forcing Space Marines to contend with a threat beyond their comprehension, while civilians panicked at the edges of the ruins. Batman assessed the situation instantly, realizing that a direct strike alone would not suffice. The demon had to be destabilized at its nexus point, while the Imperium's forces were simultaneously misdirected to prevent catastrophic civilian casualties. Grapnels fired, cables snapping taut to swing him across the battlefield. Reinforced strikes shattered limbs, and EMP grenades disabled energy nodes that amplified the demon's partial manifestation. Each action was executed with surgical precision, a deadly combination of strategy, combat skill, and psychological manipulation that left both chaos and Imperial forces momentarily disoriented. The battlefield became a choreographed chaos. Every explosion, every fall, and every redirected attack contributing to the ultimate objective, survival and victory, tempered by the harsh realities of the universe. Amid the chaos, Batman's mind remained focused on civilians trapped in the upper galleries of the ruined manufactorum. One group, frozen in terror, clung to shattered beams while the demon's attacks threatened to collapse the entire structure. Batman moved with unmatched speed, grappling across gaps, disarming explosive devices, and creating temporary shields using debris to protect the innocents. His combat was a blend of force and restraint. Each strike neutralized the threat without endangering those he swore to protect. The balance was delicate, the stakes absolute, and the consequences of failure unthinkable. Civilians glimpsed a figure moving like a shadow, swift and merciless against enemies, yet protected beyond measure, their awe and terror mixing into a fragile hope that perhaps salvation could exist even in a universe that offered none willingly. With the demon destabilized and the remaining cultists scattered or destroyed, the final confrontation against the Imperium became unavoidable. Space Marines, reinforced by Arbites and Inquisitors, pressed forward relentlessly. Bolters thundered, and chains words carved through rubble and corrupted flesh alike. Batman utilized every advantage of the environment, collapsing walkways to create barriers, redirecting fire through controlled detonations, and striking from angles that kept him just beyond reach. The battle was brutal, a testament to his ability to operate alone against forces that had been bred and trained for absolute perfection. His mind calculated every trajectory, every timing, every potential risk, and yet even with all his skill, he knew that this was a temporary reprieve. The Imperium's judgment was absolute, and survival would depend on continued cunning, speed, and a willingness to embrace the darkness required to endure. As the firefight reached its zenith, Batman recognized that extraction was the only viable option. He deployed grapnel lines, swinging across chasms and debris-strewn streets, using the chaos of the battle to cover his escape. Bolters cracked below him, sparks flying as rounds struck metal and concrete, but he remained untouchable, a phantom among shadows. From the upper galleries, Inquisitors recorded every action, their silent judgment reflecting the inevitability of retribution. Civilians scattered, some injured, some alive, their eyes reflecting both gratitude and fear. The city itself seemed to pulse with anticipation, the echoes of warp energy lingering as a reminder that even though the immediate threat was neutralized, the universe remained unforgiving. Batman vanished into the ruins, leaving the Imperium with nothing but smoke, debris, and the knowledge that the rogue operative had survived another battle. In the final moments, as he disappeared into the labyrinthine corridors of the Hive, Batman allowed himself a fleeting reflection. He had succeeded in saving countless lives, halting the demon's emergence, and dismantling the cult's immediate plans, yet the cost was permanent isolation and relentless pursuit. The Imperium would never forgive, chaos would never relent, and the fragile balance he maintained would always be under threat. Every step forward carried the weight of a universe defined by cruelty, every decision a reminder that morality was a luxury in a universe ruled by war, fear, and absolute power. Shadows swallowed him completely, the fires of the ruined Hive city casting long, flickering shapes behind him, and in that darkness he became more than a man. He became a legend, hunted and feared, a guardian in a universe that refused to recognize mercy. Even as the echoes of battle faded, the city remained a scarred monument to the conflict, the warp energy lingering like a whisper of what might yet come. Batman knew that his war was far from over, that every victory was temporary, and that both chaos and the Imperium would continue to hunt him across the stars. Yet within that grim reality, he found purpose, survival, protection of the innocent, and a relentless pursuit of justice. Even in a universe that offered none, his cape blended with the darkness, his respirator hissed, and the shadows of Noctis Prime closed behind him as he disappeared into the endless corridors of the Hive, leaving behind a world forever changed, a city saved but scarred, and a warning to both chaos and the Imperium alike. He would not relent, and the Imperium would never forgive.